The ability to observe without evaluating is the highest form of intelligence.
There is a moment you have probably lived, but never quite named. You are about to send a message. You read it one last time. Something feels off. It sounds too eager. So you rewrite it. Now it feels forced. You try again and again. And before you realize it, more than an hour has passed and the message is still unsent. Not because you didn't know what you wanted to say, but because you knew too much about how it would sound. That is what it means to be self-aware at a high level. We are taught from early on that knowing yourself is the path to an authentic life, that the more you understand your patterns, your motivations, your internal mechanisms, the freer you become. Self-awareness is sold as the key to everything, and for a while, when you first begin to observe yourself, it seems true. The pieces start fitting together. You begin to understand why you react certain ways, why you choose certain people, why you repeat certain mistakes, but then something strange happens. The more you learn about yourself, the less natural everything feels. Every conversation develops a layer of analysis on top of it. Every emotion arrives accompanied by a question about what it means. Every choice carries the weight of everything you have ever read about how choices work. And at some point on this journey, something that was supposed to make you freer begins to feel like a different kind of cage than the one you left. The ancient Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi described this with an image that sounds like a joke, but contains one of the deepest ideas anyone has ever had. He dreamed he was a butterfly. He woke up and he was Zhuangzi again, and he genuinely didn't know. Was he Zhuangzi who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming of being Zhuangzi? He had no answer, and that was exactly the point. Because that is what happens when you observe too much. You split. On one side, the person who simply lives. On the other, the person who watches that person living. And these two cannot exist simultaneously. The moment you notice that you are being spontaneous, the spontaneity ends. The moment you register that a conversation is going well, you begin performing the version of yourself that makes conversations go well. Observation changes what is being observed. Always. In quantum mechanics, there is a phenomenon called superposition. A photon exists in two places at once, until the moment someone observes it. In the instant of observation, it collapses into a single position. Before being seen, it was everything at once. After being seen, it is only one thing. The same principle operates in human consciousness. In our natural state, we exist simultaneously as the actor and the person. The moment we become self-aware, we collapse into two fixed roles: the actor, who is observed, and the critic who observes. What you are about to understand in this video is not that self-awareness is a mistake. It is something more disturbing and more useful than that. It is that the version of self-awareness you were sold may not be leading you toward the freedom it promised. It may be trapping you in a hall of mirrors, where each reflection generates another reflection, and the exit keeps moving further away. There is a way out, but it is not where you have been looking. You have had that moment where the music just hits right and your body simply responds. It is not a decision. It is a direct connection between the sound and you. Your body moves before your mind processes what is happening. And for an instant, you are whole, actor and person simultaneously, without division. And then you catch your reflection in the mirror. Nothing dramatic happens. The room is the same. The music is the same. You are still the only person there. But something shifts immediately and irreversibly. The critic walked in. And the critic has opinions about everything: your rhythm, your grace, how you compare to that person you once saw dance and who was clearly better. Your movements go stiff. The beat your body was following naturally now needs to be processed and approved before becoming gesture. And you stop dancing, not because you stopped liking the music, because you divide it. This is what self-awareness does in its most basic form. It separates you from yourself. On one side, the self that simply acts, feels, responds to the world directly and without mediation. On the other, the self that watches that first self, analyzes it, judges it, wonders whether what is happening is authentic enough or whether it is being performed. And here is the core problem. These two cannot exist simultaneously at the same level of activation. When one is fully present, the other recedes. And the moment you summon the critic, the actor loses the thread. Think about a date with someone where the conversation flows naturally. Words come without you having to build them. You are funny without trying to be funny, present without remembering to be present. And then your brain registers this. It thinks to itself, "Hey, this is going well." And in that exact instant, you left the date and entered an observation of the date. Now you are analyzing what was making the conversation good, trying to identify the elements, trying to reproduce the formula. And in doing so, you lost access to the source of what made everything natural. Quantum mechanics has a name for this. Observing a particle changes its behavior. The photon that exists in superposition in two places at once collapses into a single position the moment it is observed. It is a principle that operates far beyond physics. It operates in the moment you begin watching yourself. The self in superposition, simultaneously actor and person, collapses into two fixed roles when self-awareness enters. The result is not more self-knowledge. It is less wholeness. There is a principle in neuroscience called memory reconsolidation. It works like this. Every time you access a memory, you are not simply retrieving a stored file. You are rewriting that file. The act of remembering modifies the memory. Researchers at the University of Texas documented that there is a window of several hours after a memory is recalled where it becomes vulnerable to being updated, distorted, or reinforced by your current emotions and environment. The past you access is never completely the past you lived. It is always a version edited by the present. This creates a specific trap for those who practice self-awareness intensely. Think about your first breakup. In the moment it happened, you knew one thing with absolute precision. It hurt. Losing someone you believed would be permanent hurt in a way that needed no explanation. It was raw and direct. Then you began learning about psychology. You read about attachment theory. You understood that she had an avoidant style and you had an anxious one. That your attempts at closeness activated her fear of abandonment. That the pattern was classic. Everything suddenly made sense. Later, you learned about power dynamics in relationships. You revisited the same memory from that angle and realized you had minimized her plans, had placed the relationship above her autonomy, had exercised a kind of control you hadn't recognized at the time. New meaning. New version of the story. The problem is not that these readings are wrong. The problem is that your past self did not have access to these tools. He was reacting with what he had. And every time you revisit that memory with new concepts, you lose a little more contact with what it actually was. The raw pain of the loss gets replaced by an elaborate narrative. And elaborate narratives have a cost. They pull you away from the direct experience and install you in a story about the experience, a story you write and rewrite continuously. And here, the problem grows larger. Because narratives need characters. Characters need fixed identities. And fixed identities need labels. Clinical language has become the common tongue of modern self-awareness. You are not just someone who sometimes feels overwhelmed in social settings. You are someone with social anxiety. Not someone who had some difficult experiences in childhood. Someone with attachment trauma. Not someone who prefers to work alone, an introvert. Not someone who gets nervous in interviews. You have imposter syndrome. Labels are not your invention. Clinical language exists for legitimate reasons. The problem is what happens when those labels stop being descriptions and become identities. When you stop saying that you sometimes feel anxious and start saying you are an anxious person. When the label stops being a tool for understanding and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Every time you feel nervous, the label confirms the narrative. Every time the narrative is confirmed, the nervousness is interpreted as evidence of your anxious identity, and the cycle closes. The worst part is that this does not happen with bad intention. It happens because as human beings, we are narrative by construction. We need a coherent story about ourselves. The label offers that coherence. It also offers community, a shared language, a way of being understood. But coherence has a price. The price is fluidity. And humans are fundamentally fluid. Who you were a year ago differs greatly from who you are right now. Carrying a rigid identity built on self-awareness into the life you are trying to create is like walking toward the future with your eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. There is a specific pattern that intense self-awareness produces when it reaches a certain depth. Call it the spiral. It begins reasonably. Level 1, you notice that you are anxious, useful, valid. Level 2, you ask yourself why you are anxious, also useful. Level 3, you begin asking whether the analysis itself is worsening the anxiety. Already complicated. Level 4, you wonder if you are overthinking your overthinking. Level 5, you are thinking about your thinking, about your thinking, about your thinking. And at some point, the logic collapses completely, and you are in a loop from which there is no rational exit. Meditation, which should be the solution, becomes part of the problem. You sit down to observe your thoughts, but who is observing those thoughts? Now you are not meditating. You are thinking about watching thoughts about watching thoughts. Journaling, the other classic solution, also becomes a trap. You begin writing to process feelings, but inevitably start writing for a future version of yourself who will read this journal. You are no longer processing. You are constructing a narrative for a reader who hasn't arrived yet. The journal stopped being a mirror and became a stage. The cruel irony is that the people most committed to self-awareness usually become the biggest victims of its darker consequences. They never actually get to have direct experiences because they are always at least one level removed from simply being. And here is something that is rarely said with this clarity. You are not self-aware because you are deep. You are self-aware because inadequacy is profitable. Think about how much time you spend in a state of self-evaluation, correcting your appearance, replaying past interactions, measuring your progress against some ideal you did not fully choose, asking yourself whether you are growing fast enough, loving well enough, being authentic enough. Now consider who benefits from that state. It is not you. It is an entire industry built on your permanent feeling that you have not yet arrived where you should be. The self-improvement industry does not sell growth. It sells the promise of growth, which is different, because selling actual growth would be bad business. A satisfied customer stops buying. A customer who is always almost there. Always one course or framework or coaching session away from the best version of themselves. that customer buys forever. Excessive self-awareness is not an unfortunate side effect of this system. It is the main product. But there is something more fundamental here, something that goes beyond the market. The very premise on which all of this searching is built may be wrong. Western philosophy, from Socrates to Freud, constructed its architecture on a specific premise. There is a real, solid, coherent self waiting to be discovered beneath everything the world has placed on top of you. Your job is to find it. Know thyself. Find your truth. Be authentic. Eastern philosophy, specifically Buddhism and Taoism, started from a radically different place. In Buddhism, there is the concept of anatta, meaning no self. This is not nihilism. It is not the idea that you do not exist. It is the idea that the self you are searching for, fixed, permanent, coherent, simply does not exist to be found. You are not a statue waiting to be revealed by the chisel of self-knowledge. You are a river, different from moment to moment. A continuity without an unchanging essence at the center. Zhuangzi, the Taoist philosopher who dreamed he was a butterfly, was not making a philosophical joke. He was pointing at something our culture has profound difficulty accepting. That the urgency to know who you really are, to have certainty, to fix an identity and defend it, that urgency is itself a form of attachment. And attachment, both in Buddhism and in the direct experience of anyone who has ever been trapped in a spiral of self-analysis, is a source of suffering. Meditation, as it was exported to the West, is taught as a self-improvement tool, a practice for creating a calmer and more productive self. But the original purpose of Buddhist meditation was not to create a better self. It was to reveal that there is no self to improve. The practice was liberation through dissolution, not ascent through refinement. This does not mean Western philosophy is useless. It does not mean you should abandon everything you know about yourself. It means that the search for a solid and permanent self may be built on a premise that is not universal. And the most painful consequences of excessive self-awareness, the spiral, the label that traps, the constant performance, may be specific symptoms of a culture that believes something that may not be true. Zhuangzi never answered the butterfly question. And the longer you sit with that, the more you realize the absence of an answer was the whole point. Because the question itself assumes something that may not be true. That one version of you is more real than the other. That beneath all the layers, there is a final, fixed, discoverable you waiting to be found. What if there isn't? What if you are not a destination, but a direction? The spiral does not end by analyzing your way out of it. It ends the moment you stop believing the critic has the final word. Not by silencing it, not by defeating it, simply by choosing to move anyway, before the approval arrives, before the certainty lands, before the inner verdict is read, the critic will still speak. You just stop waiting for its permission. Think of the most charismatic person you knew growing up, not necessarily the one you most admired, the one who simply seemed to move with life's tempo, whatever the situation. That person was probably not doing it because they were smarter or more prepared. They were doing it because they were not watching themselves. And that is a kind of freedom that no self-awareness framework can deliver. Because the moment you learn the formula for spontaneity, you have lost access to the thing itself. There is an uncomfortable question worth asking now. Who benefits from your self-awareness? When you are up at 3 a.m. replaying a conversation, mentally correcting your appearance, measuring whether you were authentic enough, someone is profiting from that, and it is almost certainly not you. Recognizing who benefits from your self-analysis does not solve the problem, but it is the first genuinely self-aware action in this entire journey. It is the observation that finally observes the system, rather than just yourself inside the system. The deepest paradox of all of this is this: the only way to find yourself is to stop looking. The real you is not the one you see in the mirror after hours of self-analysis. It is the one who appears when you forget to look. It is the person dancing before they catch their reflection. It is the version of you in a conversation going well before you noticed it was going well. The self in superposition before the collapse, when you are still actor and person simultaneously without division. This is not an invitation to carelessness. It is an invitation to something more precise and more difficult. It is learning to trust what emerges when you are not watching yourself, to act before having complete certainty, to accept that you are a river and not a statue, that there is no final essence to be discovered, only a continuity to be lived. Zhuangzi did not know whether he was a man who dreamed of being a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of being a man. And he considered that an answer, not a problem, because the question of which self is the real one presupposes that one is more real than the other. What if both are equally real? What if the fluidity between them is the most truthful thing there is? The self you are searching for with such seriousness may not be a discovery waiting for you. It may be something you create by living, not by observing. The butterfly did not need to know it was dreaming in order to fly. If this video touched something you had not yet been able to name, share it with someone who is stuck in the same spiral. Subscribe to the channel, because what was opened here continues, and every video is one more layer of what you already are, being remembered.